The Panhard 178 or Pan was an advanced French reconnaissance 4x4 armoured car that was designed for the French Cavalry before World War II. It had a crew of 4 and was equipped with an effective 25mm main armament and a 7.5mm coaxial machine gun. A number of these vehicles were in 1940 taken over by the Germans after the fall of France and employed as the Panzerspähwagen P204 for some months after the armistice of June. Production continued for the benefit of Germany. After the war, a derived version, the Panhard 178B, was again taken into production by France. Development. In December 1931, the French Cavalry conceived a plan for the future production of armoured fighting vehicles. One of the classes foreseen was that of an automitrailleuse de découverte or AMD, a specialized long-range reconnaissance vehicle. The specifications were formulated on the 22nd of December 1931, changed on the 18th of November 1932 and approved on the 9th of December 1932. They called for a weight of 4 metric tons, a range of 400 kilometers, a speed of 70 kilometers per hour, a cruising speed of 40 kilometers per hour, a turning circle of 12 meters, 5 to 8 millimeters armor, a 20 millimeters gun and a 7.5 millimeters machine gun. In 1933, one of the competing companies, the others being Renault, Berliet and Lattel, that had put forward proposals, Panhard, was allowed to build a prototype. The other companies also were ordered to build prototypes. Renault constructed 2 vehicles for Renault VZ, including an armoured personnel carrier variant. Berliet constructed a single Berliet VUB and Lattel belatedly presented a design in April 1934. The Panhard vehicle was ready in October 1933 and presented to the Commission de Vincennes in January 1934 under the name Panhard Voyager Special Type 178. It carried a Vincennes Workshop 13.2mm machine gun turret, as the intended one was not ready yet. After testing between the 9th of January and the 2nd of February 1934, the type, despite having larger dimensions than prescribed and thus being a lot heavier than 4 tons, was accepted by the Commission on the 15th of February under the condition some small modifications were carried out. Of all the competing projects, it was considered the best. The Berliet VUB-EG was reliable but too heavy and traditional. The Lattel version had no all-terrain capacity. In the autumn, the improved prototype, now lacking the bottom tracks of the original type, was tested by the cavalry. In late 1934, the type was accepted under the name AMD Panhard Model 1935. The type was now fitted with the APX-3B turret. After complaints about reliability, such as cracking gun sights and overheating, between the 29th of June and the 2nd of December 1937 a new test program took place, resulting in many modifications, including the fitting of a silencer and a ventilator on the turret. The ultimate design was very advanced for its day and still appeared modern in the 1970s. It was the first 4x4 armoured car mass-produced for a major country. Production. The final assembly and painting of the armoured cars took place in the Panhard and Amp Levasseur factory at the Avenue d'Ivry in the 13th arrondissement of Paris. There, however, only the automotive parts and lesser fittings were built in. The armoured hull was in its entirety prefabricated by forges serving as subcontractors. At first, the main supplying company was Batignolles Châtillon at Nantes, that could supply a maximum of about 20 per month. In 1940, the forge at Firmenich became dominant. Likewise, the turret, fitted with its armament by the Atelier de Construction de coaxial was as such again made by subcontractors, mainly the Société Française de Constructions Mécaniques et d'Inane. Production of the turrets tended to trail behind that of the hulls. On the 1st of September 1939 this order backlog had grown to 35. That there was little hope of solving this problem is shown by the production planned on the 28th of October 1939 for the spring of 1940, 50 hulls as against 40 turrets per month. At the time of acceptance in 1934, already 15 had been decided to be ordered on the 25th of April 1934 and 15 more on the 20th of May at a price of 275,000 francs per hull, more expensive than a French light infantry tank of the period. The actual orders were made on the 1st of January and the 29th of April 1935 respectively, and the notification sent on the 27th of May with a planned delivery between January and March 1936. Due to strikes, the first vehicles of these orders were only delivered from the 2nd of February 1937. 19 had been produced by April, the last delivered in November. The two first orders together can be seen as a separate pre-series of 30 that differed slightly in many details from later produced vehicles. A third order for 80 vehicles was made on the 15th of September 1935 but only notified on the 11th of August 1937. They were scheduled to be delivered between January and July 1938, but due to strikes and delays in the production of the turrets, the actual dates were the 24th of June 1938 and the 10th of February 1939. There were another 3 orders of which deliveries started before the war. One of 40 dated the 11th of January 1938 and delivered between the 13th of February and the 31st of July 1939. A fifth of 35 cars made on the same date but delivered between July and December 1939 after a sixth order for 80 vehicles made on the 18th of January 1938 and delivered between June and November 1939. On the 1st of September 1939, 219 vehicles had been delivered including prototypes, 71 behind schedule. However, production increases soon allowed Panhard to reduce the backlog, at least for the hulls. From December vehicles were produced from 2 later orders, a seventh of 40, made on the 18th of January 1938 and completed between December 1939 and April 1940, and an eighth of 80 vehicles delivered from January until the middle of May 1940. The monthly deliveries were 9 in September 1939, 11 in October, 18 in November, 22 in December, 25 in January 1940, 8 in February, 16 in March, 34 in April and a final 30 in May 1940. The total production of completed vehicles of the standard version of the AMD 35 for France was thus 339. However, the total manufactured of all vehicles of the larger Panhard 178 family was much higher as there were several non-standard versions, and not all production was completed for France. Firstly, there was a radio command variant, 12 of which had been ordered in 1937 and again in 1938, the notification of which was issued on the 9th of December 1938, the 24 vehicles being delivered between October and December 1939. The next variant was a colonial version, 8 of which were produced. The most important addendum consisted of an order for 128 modified vehicles destined for North Africa. Furthermore, there were two last orders of the standard version, one of 12 notified on the 22nd of July 1939, the second 400 made on the 27th of September 1939, of which both only 14 hulls would be made for France. Of all these orders, at the time of the armistice in June, 491 had been completed. On the 7th of June 52 hulls had been in stock for which no turret was as yet available. Probably until the 22nd of June another 10 hulls were made for a total production of 553, 30 in 1937, 81 in 1938, 236 in 1939 and 206 in 1940. Total hull production of all versions had been 24 in September 1939, 26 in October, 27 in November, 33 in December, 36 in January 1940, 40 in February, 32 in March, 42 in April, 32 in May and 24 until the interruption in the middle of June. After the armistice another 176 were completed from prefabricated parts for the German occupier, for a total of 729. These actual production numbers can be compared to the production plans. Before the war it had been intended that war manufacture would be 30 per month. When war really broke out, it was soon realized that the need to raise new units, the replacement of older worn-out vehicles and the creation of a material reserve to compensate the loss of about 20% of the cars of a combat unit per month during a campaign, would necessitate a much higher production level, even when resorting to the expedient of fitting surplus hulls with older turrets. It had been planned on the 10th of October 1939 to bring production to 40 per month in March, 50 in July, 55 in September and 60 from November 1940 for the duration of the war. Later projections were even more pessimistic. Accordingly, on top of the 657 vehicles notified at the date on the 15th of April 1940, another 450 were ordered, a third of them of the radio version, bringing total orders to 1107. The desired peak rate of 60 vehicles was put forward with 2 months to September 1940. On the 1st of October 1018, vehicles had to be completed. However, the planned production was now limited to March 1941, as Supreme Commander Maurice Gamelin had concluded on the 27th of February 1940 from the events during fall of ice that lightly armored vehicles could not survive on the modern battlefield. For the spring of 1941, the Panhard 178 had to be replaced on the production lines by the heavy AM-40P armored car, that was to be much more heavily armored and armed. Description: in order to function as an effective long-range reconnaissance vehicle, the Panhard 178 had been kept as light as possible. The vehicle was thus rather small, only 4.79 meters in length, 2.01 meters wide and 2.31 meters in height. Also the tapering engine compartment, where a Panhard ISK4FI V4 6332 cc 105 horsepower at 2000 revolutions per minute motor had been installed, was built very low, giving the vehicle its distinctive silhouette with a protruding fighting compartment. Both compartments were separated by a fireproof bulkhead. The use of a large turret with 26 mm frontal armor and 13 mm side armor, combined with 7 mm, 9 mm, 13 mm and 20 mm bolted and riveted armor plate for the hull, had compromised weight considerations however, so the vehicle still weighed 8.2 metric tons. However, the mobility was rather good for a French AFV of the period. A maximum speed of 72.6 km per hour, a cruising speed of 47 km per hour and a practical range of about 300 km, made possible by two fuel tanks of 120 and 20 liters, the main one located at the extreme back of the hull. Rough terrain capacity was somewhat limited, however, though all four road wheels were actuated. The leaf spring suspension confined the off-road speed to 42 km per hour, and the possession of just four wheels allowed for a wading and a trench crossing. Capacity of only 60 centimeters, it could overcome a 30 cm vertical obstacle, assisted by two small bottom wheels in the front hull. The driver was in the front, using an 8-speed gearbox and a normal steering wheel. Steering could be switched into reverse immediately to allow the assistant driver, facing the rear and seated to the left of the engine, to drive the vehicle backwards in case of an emergency, using all four off-road gears, with a maximum speed of 42 km per hour. This dual-drive capacity is common for reconnaissance vehicles. The second driver had a separate entrance door at the left side of the hull. He doubled as a radio operator in the platoon commander or squadron commander vehicles, operating the short-range AR-29 and medium-range AR-26 set respectively. To make long-range communications possible, 1 out of 12 armored cars was a special radio vehicle. The APX-3 turret, having a large double hatch on the back, was rather large and could accommodate 2 men. Like with the AMC-35, this was at the time exceptional for French AFVs. In the electrically traversed APX-3, the commander on the right and gunner on the left benefited from a rudimentary turret basket, and sufficient vision devices including one periscope per man and PPL, RX-168 episcopes. Armament was first intended to be a newly developed 20mm gun. When this failed to materialize, it was considered to use a 37mm Model 16 gun, standard for armored cars, but this was rejected because of its poor anti-armor capacity. Instead, the 25mm SAR-35 was chosen, a shortened L-47.2 derivation of the standard French anti-tank gun, the 25mm Hotchkiss Model 34. It was fitted with the L711 sight. To compensate for the shorter barrel, the rounds used heavier charges, giving even a slightly superior muzzle velocity of 950 meters per second. The gun had a maximum penetration of about 50 millimeters when using a tungsten round. The light 380-gram projectile was easily deflected by sloped armor, though, even a 45 degrees angle, giving about 100% extra protection over the armor thickness measured along the horizontal plane. German tanks had many vertical plates, however, and were vulnerable up to about 800 meters. On the other hand, the light round, even when penetrating, often failed to set fire to an enemy vehicle. It sometimes took 15 shots to achieve this. 150 rounds of ammunition were stored. The secondary armament was an optionally coaxial Rifle 7.5mm machine gun with 3,750 rounds, 1,500 of which were armor-piercing. A reserve machine gun was carried to the right of the driver that could be mounted on top of the turret for anti-aircraft defense. Its magazines were carried on the inner walls of the fighting compartment, including the large main entrance door on the right. Experience showed that the type had several shortcomings: a weak clutch, slow turret rotation, a cramped cramped interior, unreliable radio sets, poor cross-country drive, and very noisy brakes. On the other hand, it was reliable, easy to drive on roads, and the engine as such was rather silent, all desirable qualities for a reconnaissance vehicle. During the production run, several modifications would be made, such as the fitting of lifting hooks. The first 30 vehicles had two more primitive periscopes on the turret roof, a Creation diascope on its front, and simple vision slits with armored shutters on its sides. The drivers too had to use vision slits instead of an episcope. They also lacked a silencer and had semicircular cutouts at the wheel plate edges. From about the 111th vehicle onward, several changes were introduced, including the fitting of an armored ventilator covering on top of the turret, a factory plate with the name Panhard on the nose, and a new softer factory camouflage pattern with the brown and bronze-green spots no longer separated by black lines. For the 270th vehicle onwards, stowage boxes were constructed on the back fenders, obscuring the pointed form of the engine compartment. The last turrets produced also had a backward-pointing episcope for the commander, instead of a vision slit. Operational history. The first 19 vehicles were in April 1937 taken into service by 6 cuirassiers. At the outbreak of the Second World War, 218 vehicles were fielded with 11 squadrons. In the spring of 1940, 21 Eskadron DAMD-35 was first destined for Finland and the Winter War, but then sent to Narvik to assist Norway during Weserübung. It was in fact renamed for EGRDR and was equipped with 13 Panhard 178s. During the Battle of France from the 10th of May 1940, on which date about 370 completed vehicles were available, the Panhard 178s were allocated to reconnaissance units of the mechanized and motorized forces. At the time, the Panhard 178 represented one of the best armored cars in its class in the world. The 3 armored divisions of the cavalry, the divisions Leges Mécaniques, had a nominal organic strength of 40 armored cars, plus 4 radio vehicles and an organic material reserve of 4 vehicles. This would make for a total of 144 in these mechanized light divisions. The light divisions of the cavalry, the divisions Leges de Cavalieri, had a squadron of 12 Panhards plus a radio car and a material reserve of 4 in the Regiment de Automitrailleuses. The total in the cavalry light divisions would thus be 85. Not only the cavalry but the infantry also employed the type in the GRDIs, groups de reconnaissance de division d'infanterie, the reconnaissance units of the divisions d'infanterie mécaniques, that despite the name were largely motorized infantry divisions. These were 1 EGRDI for 5 EDIM, 2 EGRDI for 9 EDIM, 3 EGRDI for 12 EDIM, 4 EGRDI for 15 EDIM, 5 EGRDI for 25 EDIM, 6 EGRDI for 3 EDIM, and 7 EGRDI for 1 EDIM. Their organization was basically identical to the units of the DLCs, but the strength was 16, making for a total of 112 vehicles. The actual strength of above units might differ, but if all were on strength, 24 vehicles were present in the material reserve used for driver training, as apart from colonial vehicles. Exactly 378 exemplars had been delivered on the 10th of May 1940. After the start of the invasion, several emergency ad hoc units were formed. These included the 32 EGRDI for the regular 43 EDI, having 5 Panhards, The 4EDCR, the armored division of the infantry hastily assembled in May, got 43 Panhard 178s. The DLMs used the Panhard units for strategic reconnaissance. In the case of one DLM, this entailed a movement well in advance of the main body of the division, as it was supposed to maintain a connection with the Dutch army during the Battle of the Netherlands. Within 32 hours, the armored cars of the group Lestoquois covered a distance of over 200 kilometers, reaching the environment of Hartergenbosch in the afternoon of the 11th of May. After some successful skirmishes with German armored cars belonging to the reconnaissance platoons of the German Infantry Division N, they withdrew, as the Dutch were already in full retreat. They were asked by the Dutch to assist an infantry attack on the southern bridgehead of the strategic Moerdijk bridges, held by German paratroopers. As the cars were not suitable for such a task, the commander hesitated after incorrectly concluding the bridgehead was strongly defended, while thus being immobile. This group of Panhards was surprised in open polder landscape by a Stuka attack, with one vehicle disabled, and quickly withdrew to the south. The other two DLMs hurried forward to stop the advance of 3 and 4 PD after the surprisingly swift fall of Fort Eben-Emael. The Panhards fighting a successful delaying battle against their German counterparts until the Battle of Hannut, the largest tank battle of the campaign. In general, they had little trouble in dispatching the lightly armored German armored cars, whose 20mm main armament was not very effective against the Panhard frontal armor, as the type was well suited to German tactics. At least 190 Panhards, most of them brand new, were issued to German reconnaissance units for use in Operation Barbarossa in 1941 under the designation of Panzerspähwagen P204. 107 would be lost that year. Among these were some radio vehicles designated Panzerspähwagen P204. 30 Panhards were listed as in use on the Eastern Front on the 31st of May 1943. Some of these were fitted with spaced armor. After the liberation of France, the 1E groupement mobile de reconnaissance would, among a bewildering variety of types, also use some Panhard 178s. Some of these modified